Shabbat Shalom and Chag Purim Sameach. Today we're celebrating Purim, one of our most joyous festivals. And we have read, and hopefully if you have not, or you're not going to be part of our service, you will have read at home the whole of the Megillah. As we read in the Megillah, the book of Esther, Esther was an orphan Jew from the tribe of Benjamin, brought up by her older cousin, Mordecai. The name Esther means star, and it is derived from the root name of the goddess Ishtar, indicating the level of assimilation that was already prevalent. This was the kind of name given by Persians and Babylonians to Jews and other captive peoples. Daniel and his three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, you probably don't even know them by those names, were called Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, after pagan deities. Under the Greeks and the Romans, Jews frequently had both Jewish names and Greek or Latin names, as we see with Rav Shaul, who was also known as Paul. This was not his Christian name, as some people tend to think, but it was actually his pagan name. Esther's Hebrew name was Hadassah, the name by which she would have been known within her family and the Jewish community in Persia, as most Jews today have two names as well. A name that is, say, an English name or a French name, but also a Hebrew name, which is used in the synagogue and for all services and ceremonies. Hadassah's name means myrtle, from the fragrant tree of that name, which we use the branches of at Sukkot, a name that signifies peace and thanksgiving. King Xerxes, this is the name we have from Greek historians, while in Hebrew his name is closer to Ahasuerus. Xerxes decided to put on a show of his abundant wealth for 180 days so that everyone in his kingdom could see how powerful and wealthy he was. This was followed by a lavish 7-day feast that was calculated to glorify him even further, not only to his own subjects, but also to visiting diplomats, dignitaries, and merchants. On the 7th day of this festival, King Xerxes called for his queen Vashti to come into his presence in order to display her beauty and his ownership to his inebriated noblemen. She refused to come. She recognized the personal insult intended as a demonstration of Xerxes' domination of her and of his household, and his total mastery of all men and women, especially women, of course. For her disobedience, Vashti was banished from the king's presence for life. Exit Vashti. But at least she wasn't beheaded, as a certain English king was fond of doing when he tired of a wife. Soon after this, Xerxes went off to one of his wars with Greece, and sometime later he returned home to a sort of empty palace. Well, hardly empty, but at least without an actual queen. So someone suggested that he should seek a new queen. Only the best. He should hold a Miss Persian Queen beauty contest, and the winner could be the queen. Esther was among the young girls selected, and after a 12-month beauty regime, she met with Xerxes for the first time. We know, of course, that God was at work behind the scenes, preparing Xerxes' heart and Esther. And so when he saw her, he chose her to become the new queen. We also read in this chapter of Mordecai's mitzvah. Mordecai happened to overhear a plot to assassinate Xerxes. As a good subject, he personally alerted the appropriate people so that the king's life was saved. This act went unrewarded for some reason, but it was recorded in the Chronicles of the King. Later, of course, it was used by God to draw attention to Mordecai the Jew. People may forget, but God does not forget. In chapter 3, we meet Haman the Agagite, not a Persian at all, but one from within the empire who had been honored by the king and given a high position. It's likely that his success was due to his wealth and to the fact that he was an opportunist. But despite his growing power at court, Haman was furious because Mordecai the Jew, who sat at the gate, refused to bow down to him. Haman's anger, fueled by Hasatan and his massive ego, led him to plot not only the execution of Mordecai, but mass murder, an earlier version of Hitler's final solution, that all the Jews in Xerxes' empire should be killed. When Mordecai heard the terrible news, he did the logical thing. He called upon Esther to intercede with the king. But there were a few problems. Firstly, Xerxes didn't know that Esther was a Jew because Mordecai had suggested that this piece of information need not be given at the time of her selection for the beauty contest. Secondly, Esther had no idea how Xerxes would respond to her presumptuous act of entering the throne room without a summons. Consider his response to Vashti when she failed to follow protocol. Esther's reluctance to approach the king was met by stern words from her cousin and mentor, Mordecai. In Esther 4:14, Mordecai's eternally memorable words are conveyed to her. If you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Esther listened to Mordecai, and she agreed to go to the king. She would appeal to the king, giving herself into God's hands. She asked, however, that Mordecai organize a time of fasting and prayer for her and her mission to the king. She knew that she needed God's favor if she was to succeed in her objective to save her people. Esther approached the king, and thankfully, she was warmly received by him. And so the first hurdle was overcome, giving her greater assurance of success. But using wisdom far beyond her years, she invited the king and Haman to a banquet, setting the stage, preparing the way for her ultimate request to the king. But how does one go about informing an all-powerful king that he has given authority into the hands of such an evil, self-serving man? How could she tell the king, her husband, about Haman's plot to kill her people? Would he care? Meanwhile, Haman's hatred for Mordecai had grown out of all proportion to Mordecai's actual significance. On the advice of his friends and of his wife, Haman had a huge gallows prepared near his home. It was his intention to get special permission to publicly hang Mordecai, perhaps even in advance of the day chosen for the Jews' ultimate liquidation from the Persian Empire, the potential final solution of antiquity. Coincidentally, the king happened to have a restless night. He couldn't sleep. I wonder who inspired his sleeplessness. He called for a scribe to read aloud to him from the record books, no doubt calculated to put him to sleep quickly. Again, coincidentally, the scribe just happened to select the portion of the records that recounted the action of Mordecai the Jew in saving the king from assassination by some of his own servants. In an extraordinary exchange, the king welcomed Haman to his court early the next day with the words, "What should be done for the man whom the king delights to honor?" Haman, ever arrogant, proud, and sure of himself, could think of no one whom the king would want to honor more than himself. So, with this thought, he advised a lavish display of wealth and majesty and honor to be bestowed on the man in such a public manner that everyone could not help but take notice. Xerxes was struck by the fitness of such a display for someone who had saved the life of the king himself. So he ordered Haman to do all this for Mordecai the Jew. Note the irony. He had to bow in this way to the very man whom he had come to seek permission to hang. Not exactly auspicious for Haman. Meanwhile, back in her part of the palace, Esther was preparing for the second banquet of wine to which she had invited the king and Haman. She waited for Xerxes to request the reason for her invitation. Even as she waited, she prepared her answer, carefully mentioning that she would have not bothered the king with anything trivial like her people being enslaved. She finally revealed to the king that someone was plotting. Note the word she used. Someone was plotting to destroy her and her people. With brilliant timing, Xerxes asked, "Who is this man who plots against you and your people?" Haman is identified as the villain, and he offends Xerxes even further by appearing to fall upon Esther's couch while Xerxes is trying to gain control of himself, taking a walk in the garden. At this point, Xerxes has had enough. A thoughtful servant who no doubt had had enough of Haman's arrogance pointed to the gallows built by Haman for Mordecai, which apparently were visible because they were so large, and Xerxes commanded, "Hang him on it." And this was how Esther and Mordecai were used by God to save our people. As the psalmist writes, "Do to them as you did to Midian, to Sisera and Yavin at Vadi Kishon. They were destroyed at Endor and became manure for the ground. Make their leaders like Orav and Zeav, and their princes like Zevach and Zalmunna, who said, 'Let's take possession of God's meadows for ourselves.' My God, make them like whirling dust, like chaff driven by the wind, like fire burning up the forest, like a flame that sets the mountains ablaze. Drive them away with your storm. Terrify them with your tempest. Fill their faces with shame so that they will seek your name, Adonai. Let them be ashamed and fearful forever. Yes, let them perish in disgrace. Let them know that you alone, whose name is Adonai, are the Most High over all the earth." In that day, our people were dispersed over 127 provinces and lands. Our own land and the city of Jerusalem were still in ruins, although some of our people had returned and rebuilding had slowly begun. Jews undoubtedly differed from one another in custom and dress and language according to the place of their dispersal, very much as Jews differed before the restoration of the State of Israel. As in the UK today, there are many Jews who concealed their Jewishness or had become assimilated into the surrounding pagan culture. But our enemies recognized the essential quality which made us into one people. Their laws are different from those of any other people. Yes, absolutely right. Following Torah always sets us apart. In his wicked desire to annihilate Mordecai the Jew, Haman wanted to destroy all the Jews, young and old, children and women. Some Jews adhered to the Torah and mitzvot. They sought to follow God. Some Jews had only weak spiritual ties with our people. But none could escape the classification of belonging to that one people. And every one of us was included in Haman's plan, just as we were all included in Hitler's plan. In all ages, there have been those like Haman who served our enemy, Hasatan, but we have outlived them thanks to the power of our God and his ongoing eternal plan for our people. We have survived while our enemies have been destroyed. What is the secret of our survival? Imagine a scientist seeking to understand the laws governing a certain phenomena or to discover the essential properties of a particular element. He or she would have to undertake various experiments under different conditions in order to discover these properties or laws and how they operate under all conditions. No true scientific law can be deduced from a minimum number of experiments or from experiments under similar or only slightly varied conditions. Then the results would not be conclusive. Consider, for example, evolution or the Big Bang Theory, both of which are unrepeatable and no clinical trials are possible. The same principle might be applied to our people. We are one of the oldest people groups in the world, beginning our national history from the revelation at Mount Sinai nearly 4,000 years ago, and our formative history hundreds of years earlier. In the course of these many centuries, our people have lived under extremely varied conditions in different times, different places, all over the world. If we wish to discover the essential elements making up the very basis of the existence of our people and its unique strength, we must conclude that it is not any peculiar physical or intrinsic mental characteristics, not our language, not our customs. The essential element which has united our dispersed and scattered people and made of it one people throughout our dispersion and regardless of time is the Torah and the unique Jewish way of life which God implanted within us. It's part of our DNA. This has remained basically the same throughout the ages and in all the places of our dispersion. It is the Torah and the commandments of God which have made our people indestructible. In the face of massacres, inquisitions, crusades, and pogroms, aiming at our physical destruction, and in the face of ideological onslaughts of foreign cultures aiming at our spiritual destruction, it is Hashem himself, who has kept Israel. Hine lo yanum v'lo yashan shomer Yisrael. He who keeps Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Purim teaches us an age-old lesson, which has been verified even more recently in the Shoah and in Israel's survival as a people and as a nation, despite numerous attacks, including the present one, by Hamas. No form of assimilationism, despite all of Moses Mendelssohn's careful philosophy and that of his followers, not even that which is extended over several generations, provides an escape from the Hamans, the Inquisitors, and the Hitlers. Nor can any Jew sever his ties with his people by attempting such an escape, although many have tried at various times in our history. Our existence does not depend on us. It depends upon God and the fact that our laws are different from those of any other people. We are a peculiar people. Our God is different from the gods of any and all other people. This is what learned atheists like Arnold Toynbee fail to understand when they call Israel a fossil nation, one that should have died out a long time ago. As we celebrate Purim, we are reminded that the strength of our people as a whole and of each individual Jew lies in commitment to our God, the one and only God, the God of Israel, and to his ways. Obedience to God must come first in our lives. Obedience to his commandments and to the lifestyle that he outlines, to his plan for redemption and reconciliation, to his program for our future. Our spiritual heritage contains the secret of a harmonious life here and now and a glorious future in the Olam Haba, the world to come. Every aspect of our spiritual and temporal life must be free from contradiction to the basis and essence of our existence, our covenant relationship with the one and only God, the God of Israel. We must be in tune with him in order to make our lives and our community harmonious. Our national and spiritual strength has always depended upon our ultimate reliance on God and our commitment in obedience to his commandments. This, then, is the secret of Jewish survival. God bless you. Shalom.